Hi everybody. I'm Carsten. I work as a dialogue police officer in Stockholm, Stockholm County, and I've been told there's a lot of positive energy going around the room since a couple of days. So I thought it would be a great time to talk about riots. And I also realized that I'm pretty much the only person standing in the way of you and your lunch. So this is probably a great time to hit the stage. I've been working for about 20 years, more or less, making money on conflicts. I've served in the military for 10 years. And I've served in the Balkans for 2 years out of those 10, and I've served in Afghanistan. After that I moved on to the police, and I worked for at least 8 years within the police. And as a little kid, when I grew up, I was afraid of conflicts. I tried to avoid conflicts as much as possible. And nowadays I tend to embrace conflicts. Whenever there's a conflict where I'm involved and in a relationship or at work, I tend to say, "Wow, so our opinions differ. Let's have a conflict." Because there's so much energy in having a conflict, and if you just have the tools to know how to handle the conflicts, I think you can gain a lot of energy and a lot of positive effects out of having a conflict. So what is dialogue policing? What is dialogue policing all about? To some people it might sound strange to put dialogue and policing together. And we're struggling to try and explain the concept, because a lot of people tend to say, "So you're the dialogue police, and all the other guys in the uniform, would they be the monologue police then?" So perhaps we should have used more fantasy trying to come up with a name. Yeah. Dialogue policing, it's all started out with a complete failure. Complete failure of the Swedish police in Gothenburg 2001. I don't know if you've heard about it. I think Hans mentioned it. In 2001 there was a great riot, or several great riots in Gothenburg during an EU summit. And that's where the Swedish police really tried to start to do some things differently with respect to handling demonstrations or crowds, basically. So since 2002 we started out in Stockholm with the dialogue police unit. So we're 12 years on our journey. We're working with pretty much any situation where you would find a crowd, which would be activism, political activism, or religious or ethnic-based or cultural-based activism. We're working since 2 years now. We started out working with football fans, or rather hooliganism, as some of you would call it. And we've been working a lot with social unrest as well. I don't know if some of you heard about Husby. Just last year in Stockholm we had a lot of social unrest for 10 days at least, but the worst part was for 10 days, and the social unrest was of course for a bit longer period. We had earlier we had Rosengård in Malmö in Scania in southern Sweden, and we have this it's coming back every third year perhaps. We have social unrest, so we work with that as well. And so this is a picture of me working. We work in plain clothes, wearing the dialogue police vest. And actually this is a fascinating moment. As you can see, I'm wearing a flower, a rose, that was given to the police at the demonstration. This is from 2009. What we call the Iranian summer. There was a lot of upheaval in Iran in 2009, and that was mirrored here in Stockholm through a lot of demonstrations. And throughout all that summer, all of the dialogue police officers were there's just about 10 of us in Stockholm, and perhaps 25 active dialogue police officers in the whole of Sweden out of 20,000 police officers. So we had, as you can imagine, in 2009 during the summer we had to work pretty much all day long and all summer long. And this was at the end of the summer, where we had been working for hundreds of demonstrations with the Iranian activists, and all of a sudden they showed up with flowers in their hands and handed over to the police officers working at the demonstration. So this was a fascinating moment. I'd like to ask you to discuss for a minute with your neighbor. In your opinion, what is the task of the police in society on a very macro, general level? Why do we have police in society? What's the purpose? What's the task? 1 minute, please. Okay, I think I understand. I'm cutting your reflection short. Is anyone ready to share? Is there could you want to share? Is it possible to raise your voice enough to hear? Yes. Excellent. Wow. That's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, anyone else?
I think this new concept, what you're doing, is originally the purpose of police is to maintain the order.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, in a human being, order is already there.
Mm-hmm.
Something is interfering to disturb the order, and you're a symbol of reminding the citizens to be aware of the natural order within the system.
Sure. I think the last reflection then.
I always thought there is a police woman, and I followed her for many years, and I think she's going to those places where I don't want to go, and do that with dignity and respect. So that is needed when the collision comes. Young people and violence and all that.
Sure. I can agree to that as well, of course. Go to those places where nobody else wants to, like up on stage. Cole and Smith, US researchers, they suggest that there are 3 universal tasks of the police. They've studied the US society, the American society, but I think they're pretty universal. What they say is basically 3 things that any society would want police to do for them. It is to maintain order, as we heard, to uphold the law and to provide service, which is of course on a very macro level, on the general level. Maintaining order is of course a challenge, because that would mean maintaining the present order. Why? Would at the same time be a very conservative force then, hindering society to develop. And upholding the current laws, of course. So bearing in mind that it might be a conservative force. I'd also like to suggest to you that another interpretation would be that police is working in the business of behavioral change. Another way of interpreting it. Trying to change the behaviors that society has doomed unwanted in society. And the funny thing is, if we reflect upon behavioral change in pretty much any other area, like how we raise our kids or train animals, or elite athletes working on setting goals mentally and trying to view these goals before racing. We work with enhancing positive images, rewarding the positive. But as I suggest to you, when we come to police methods, we try to focus on the negative. We tend to focus on the negative, the unwanted behavior, and punish that behavior, instead of focusing on the positive, as we would in any other area, to enhance that change. So we write out tickets, we put people in prison, to get people to change their behavior, instead of focusing on the positive and enhancing the positive behaviors in society, as would in any other area. So for instance, when we work with demonstrations, we focus on hindering the demonstration, the participants of the demonstration, hindering them to create disorder, public disorder, rather than focusing on helping them to reach the goals of the demonstration. So we focus on the negative. So how could the police focus otherwise? Yes, there are a few interesting examples. There's something called positive ticketing. Has anybody heard of positive ticketing? A few in the back. This is an interesting project, or it's not a project anymore. It's been running for years. Unfortunately, we don't have it in Sweden yet, but this is just an example. What it is, it started as a project with police officers writing out positive tickets. That is, what do you call those? Coupons, to be able to buy stuff at McDonald's or any sports venues or something. So this is a project that was sponsored by certain companies, and anywhere the police officer encountered positive behavior in society, they wrote out a positive ticket instead, to enhance positive behavior. And I just read half a year ago, I saw, I think, one of the first examples of that in Sweden. There was a traffic control focusing in southern Sweden, focusing on bikes, people on riding bikes. And when they stopped people on bikes that didn't have enough lamps or reflectors, instead of writing them tickets, they handed out lamps and reflectors to put on the bikes to enhance positive behavior. And all over the world, within the security sector, we focus on how do we prevent people from committing crime. That's where we look. And this is research that's been very influential in policing all over the world for the last, I think, at least 10, maybe 20 years. It's called the routine activity theory. And it's a theoretical basis for any crime prevention program anywhere in the world. And it's pretty much the basis for the private security sector. What it's all about is, it says, it's based on the idea of a human being rational, making rational choices. And the rational choice would always be, according to this theory, maximizing your own gains on an individual level. Which means that if you have a motivated offender, if you have a suitable target and a suitable object, and the absence of a capable guardian, there will be a crime. A crime will be committed. So focusing for the private security sector, of course, we're focusing on having a capable guardian. We have guards, and we protect the targets. We protect our objects with alarms and so on. So this is pretty much how we've been focusing for the last at least 20 years. How do we prevent people from committing crime? Instead, I'd suggest to you to look at another researcher, Tom Tyler, also from the US. If we start over here instead, he asked the question, how do we get people to obey the law instead of how do we prevent people from committing crimes? So you can see this is a total shift. So how do we get people to obey the law? If we start over here, this is what we want to achieve. If you'd be aiming at getting people not breaking the law, cooperating with the police, and following police instructions, if these are the aims you're looking at, according to his research, he's been doing research in this area for 10 years, he's a psychologist, at least 10 years. He says, there are a few factors that will get you this. It is the perceived risk of sanction, people being afraid of getting a ticket from the police. And he says, this is interesting when it comes to at least traffic offenses. People, and this is of course, I can see that when I work in uniform patrolling the streets, there's a classic thing that always happens when I come in my patrol car. As soon as they see the patrol car, people slow down. You recognize that for yourselves, right? I do that as well. So there's this thing, we don't want to get a ticket. So there's perceived risk of sanction. It has an effect, but only to get people not to break the law. That's the effect it gets. If we look at police legitimacy, to get people to feel that we're on the same side, police is working for me and not against me. You get effects on all of these three: following police instructions, cooperating with the police, and not breaking the law. And the last one, personal morality. It also has an effect only in this not breaking the law. And lastly, how do we achieve these? If these factors are interesting, how do we achieve these? By focusing on perceived police effectiveness, again, only has an effect of the risk of sanction, which only has an effect on not breaking the law. So what we should do is focusing, of course, on perceived police fairness. Police being friendly and helpful, treating people with respect, making fair decisions, and taking time to explain our decisions. That will actually have the best effect to reach these goals, which is of course a total change of focus for the police. So another thing is what we teach, what we train pretty much anybody hired in the security sector, police or private security company, is to get in control, to take control and to be in control. But the thing is, everybody wants to be in control, but nobody wants to be controlled. Right? At least I don't want to be controlled by anybody. And this creates a lot of tension. This is also a fundamental change we need to look at. Instead of taking control all of the time, perhaps going from taking power to sharing power, sharing power, sharing the power of the police to the people we're working with. It's also a suggestion I'd like to make. Another suggestion is, for instance, at any roll call before a demonstration or a football game or any such activity, there's a roll call or a briefing before we go out of work. And at these occasions, working with crowds, the police intelligence unit always come up on stage. They come up on stage and they give a threat and risk assessment, which is of course understandable. But the thing is, focusing only on the threats will make you only notice threats. So what we do is we're only making a threat and risk assessment, but we don't make any assessment on possibilities and chances. We're not focusing on what positive change we can make. So when the police officer come out working at the demonstration, they're looking for the risky parts, the negative behavior. And of course, we all know that we will find what we're looking for, because that's how we will interpret the situation. Instead, I'd suggest that at least also focus on the positive change that we want to see. If we would send out the police officers looking for positive change and report all the positive possibilities for change we see, I think we'd see a different police out there. To force upon or to agree upon. The police, we tend to focus on the repressive means of the police to be and take control. And I'd like to suggest to you that instead, a more effective way of working within a community or with people would be to find solutions that both parties agree upon instead. And why would that be more effective? It's more effective for one reason, that you wouldn't need one of the actors checking up on the others doing what he or she is supposed to do, because you trust one another to do whatever you have decided to do. Another thing is that trust works also when the controller is not present. I told you about the situation where I come when I patrol the streets and people slow down, but as soon as they can't see me anymore, they speed up again. And that's the same thing with, if you try to control, if you try to force an agreement upon people, if you're strong enough to be able to force that agreement upon people, they will only follow it for as long as you're there to force the agreement. But if you get an agreement that both parties agree upon, that both parties find legitimate, they will follow that agreement, they will honor that agreement even when the controller is not around. So I'd suggest going from taking control to building trust instead. I'd also suggest moving from the acute to the preventive. Looking at the Husby riots or Rosengård riots in Stockholm and Malmö respectively. Police are going around putting out fires rather than focusing on seeing to that the fires never break out. This is not very cost effective. And also, we lack the trust. We don't build the trust, the trust that we need in time of riots. We need to invest, we need to build that trust before the riots break out. And during that time, we're simply not investing in building that trust, because we're only focusing on the acute situations. And this picture is, of course, also very important. Of course, if I wanted to show you a picture of a hero, I wouldn't pick a police officer, but rather a fireman, right? And the self-image, the image of being a hero, is also important. I think a lot of people have that image of a police officer, at least we do, as a self-image. We want to be the hero. And when can you become a hero? only in the acute situation, right? There are no heroes in the preventive situation. So I'd like to suggest a slogan to you: no more heroes within the police. This is of course not sexy. This is not a picture that you would apply to become a police officer, to not become a hero. I mean, the hero image is pretty much important, I think, in our culture, and we need to get away from that. I'd also suggest going from legal and look more at what is legitimate, because that causes a lot of friction between police and society. We tend to discuss out of what is legal, and people tend to discuss about what is legitimate. What do you feel is okay? I told you I'm speeding when I'm not working, or when I'm working as well. And why is that? Why am I speeding? Why I don't have to? It's because I think I'm a good driver. I think I've got a good car. It's it's not raining. It's sunny. Good conditions. I'm in a hurry. I can find so many explanations to why I'm speeding that I think it's legitimate to be speeding. Even though I know it's not allowed, it's not legal, I still do it. I pay my neighbor's kids to watch, to look after my kids whenever I want to hit the movies or whatever, not paying taxes and so on, because I think it's legitimate, even though I'm a police officer. This creates a lot of friction between the police and society, that we tend to argue out of what is legal, but the other actors always, a lot of the time at least, talking about what is legitimate, and we need to start respecting what is the notion of what is legitimate, and not just looking at what is legal. So more heroes, at least at a couple of the images. I mentioned the self-image, of being a hero, and also the image of the other as something, out of a movie, perhaps. You have the good guy, which is of course the heroes on the left, and you have the bad guys on the right-hand side. Which is of course not a good way to start a dialogue. Having an image of yourself as a hero and the other one as a demon or something. We need to get a better understanding of the other and the other actors, which of course works both ways. And the last image, last slide. Going from the objective truth, an image of what is the objective truth, to what is the subjective perception. The importance of the subjective perception. First of all, what is an objective truth? Is there such a thing? I mean, that's a philosophical question that I'm not going to go in there. I'm just an ordinary police officer. I'm not, I wouldn't even try going there. But I'd like to suggest to you that there's at least a philosophical question of what is the objective truth. And within law, that's not really our focus. What is the truth? But rather, what can you prove? So we're looking for not the moral truth. That's not really of interest, but rather what can you prove? The legal truth. But I'd like to suggest to you that the subjective perception is rather more interesting to talk about when you're focusing on the interaction between police and society, and police and other actors, because it is the perception of people of what happened during a demonstration or in Husby, how police acted in Husby. That's what's going to lay the grounds for, or be the basis of how they view the police, of course. And if you're trying to convince somebody of the objective truth, you would very easily find yourself in a debate rather than in a dialogue, trying to understand one another. And for instance, coming to a traffic accident pretty much anywhere, you might have 10 witnesses, and all of them will tell you a different story of what happened. It's not because none of them is lying. It's because we perceive things differently, and we need to understand and respect the different views and the different perceptions of people, rather than trying to talk about what is an objective truth or what is possible to prove. So with that, I'm done, and I don't think we have any time for questions. So I thank you very much for having me.